I never thought the worst day of my life would also be the day I finally saw my son clearly for who he really was. And I wish I could tell you it broke me, but if anything, it set me free. And that, right here, is where this story really begins. Stay with me, because what I did next, Kevin never saw it coming. Welcome to Dad's Raw Revenge. Hit that like button. Drop a comment below letting me know where you're watching from. Trust me, you're going to love it here. I've lived in Portland for 22 years, settled in the Selwood neighborhood, just Kevin and me. I raised my son from the time he was 14 years old. After his mother Martha and I got divorced, he's 30 now. It wasn't easy. There were years where I worked double projects just to keep the lights on and his tuition paid. Years where I skipped things I wanted, trips I never took, repairs on my own truck I kept deferring. Because Kevin came first. Always Kevin first. I don't say that looking for applause. I say it because I need you to understand what I was standing on when all of this happened. I paid his college tuition at the University of Washington up in Seattle, and I made sure he never had to drop out, never had to scramble, never had to feel any financial panic. I handled everything. That's what fathers do. Kevin moved back to Portland after graduation, met a woman named Brittany at some rooftop event downtown, married her 3 years later. Nice wedding. I paid for a significant portion of it and didn't complain once. They settled in the Pearl District, one of those sleek condos with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the exposed ductwork that apparently counts as interior design now. Good for them. I was happy for them. Now let me tell you about the day everything changed. I want you to picture a completely ordinary Friday afternoon in late spring, the kind of day where nothing feels like it's about to go wrong. I was driving back from a hardware store out on Powell Boulevard when a delivery truck ran a red light at an intersection 3 blocks from the Springwater corridor, trail and hit the passenger side of my truck. The impact spun me into a parked car. The world went white, then very quiet, then very loud with sirens. I remember the sound, a sound that isn't like anything you've heard in a movie, by the way. And then I remember the airbag, white and suffocating, and then nothing, and then fluorescent lights, and a woman in scrubs leaning over me saying my name in that calm, measured voice that medical people use when they're trying not to alarm you. And it's somehow more alarming than anything else they could possibly do. Can you hear me? You were in an accident. You're safe. The paramedics got me to OHSU Medical Center, Oregon Health and Science University. Sits up on Marquam Hill like it's watching over the whole city. I was conscious the entire time, which I was told was a good sign. 2 cracked ribs on my right side, fractured left wrist from bracing against the steering wheel, 11 stitches across the left side of my head where it connected with the window. They admitted me for observation and monitoring because of the head impact, concussion protocol. Here's the part I need you to really sit with. I was conscious enough, barely, but enough, that when the intake nurse leaned close and asked if there was anyone they should call, I didn't hesitate. I gave them Kevin's number. Not my buddy Frank from down the street, who I've known for 20 years. My son. Because that's still what you do when you're lying on a hospital gurney with a fractured wrist and blood drying above your eye, and you're trying not to panic. You call your kid. You want your kid. That's the thing about being a parent nobody warns you about. A nurse named Debbie, a no-nonsense woman from Gresham who'd clearly seen every variety of human drama this city had to offer, was the one who called Kevin. She told me later that she'd introduced herself, explained who she was and why she was calling, and told him his father had been in a car accident and was currently admitted at OHSU. Kevin's response, according to Debbie, was, "Is he dying?" Debbie told me she was caught off guard. She said she told him no, his father was stable, but he was injured and it would really help to have a family present. And Kevin said, "Okay, so he's fine then. I have a vacation to catch. He'll be all right," and hung up. Debbie stood there holding the phone for a moment, then came into my room and very professionally told me she'd reached my son and informed him of my condition. She did not tell me what he said. I found out later. That night, I stared at the ceiling of that hospital room and waited. Told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe he was already at the airport and the call dropped. Maybe he'd misunderstood. Maybe Brittany had some kind of emergency. Maybe Debbie got cut off before she could explain how serious it was. I gave him every benefit of the doubt a father could manufacture. Around 9 that evening, I called him myself. He picked up on the third ring. "Dad." Just like that. Flat. Like he'd been waiting for this interruption. "Kevin, I'm at OHSU. I was in a car accident this morning. They called you." Silence. Then, Yeah, they did. You're stable though, right? That's what they said. I have a fractured wrist, Kevin. 2 cracked ribs. 11 stitches. Dad, that sounds rough. It really does. But Brittany and I are literally about to leave for the airport. We've had this trip planned for months. You said yourself you're stable. You're not in surgery. You'll be fine. Then I said the 3 words I'm not sure I've ever said to my son as an adult. Can you come? I need you to understand what it cost me to ask that. I am not a man who asks. I fix. I provide. I handle. Asking my son to come to my hospital bed was the most vulnerable thing I had said out loud in 11 years. And I meant every word of it. There was a pause, and I heard Brittany's voice in the background. I couldn't make out the words, but I recognized the tone. That clipped, impatient tone she uses when she feels like Kevin is taking too long on something. And then my son said, Dad, I'm sorry. I really am. But vacation comes first right now. Brittany's friends are all going to be there. And you said yourself you're stable. You'll be fine. You're a tough guy. I didn't say anything for a moment. I was 63 years old with cracked ribs and a bandaged head, and my son was pre-justifying a beach vacation. I'll check in when we land, he said. Get some rest, okay? And then, and I need you to understand that I have replayed this moment many times. He said, love you, with the exact same energy a person uses when they're hanging up with a cable company customer service rep, and ended the call. I didn't know it yet, but later I'd figure out he blocked my number after that call. Every attempt I made after that went straight to a generic voicemail with no personal greeting. No rings. Just the automated factory default rejection. I put the phone down on the hospital blanket. The room was quiet. The monitors beeped softly. Down the hall, someone's television was playing a late-night talk show and the audience was laughing at something. I looked at the ceiling for a long time. There is a specific kind of pain that has nothing to do with cracked ribs. It doesn't show up on any scan. No nurse can medicate it. It lives somewhere behind your sternum and it just sits there, this cold, heavy, clarifying thing. And it doesn't make you want to cry. It makes you very, very calm. I was very calm, and that's when I started thinking clearly. I spent 3 days at OHSU. The day I got home, cast still on, ribs still sore, I had already made some decisions. Kevin was a stress point, a critical one, and I had been ignoring the data for years. That first day home, I called my bank. I've been with the same Portland branch for 19 years. I've been sending Kevin $6,000 every single month for the past 2 years. Now, before you say anything, yes, I know how that sounds. But understand the context. When Kevin and Brittany got married, Brittany pushed for an apartment that was significantly above what Kevin's salary as a mid-level marketing coordinator could sustain. Kevin came to me, said it was just temporary, just until they got on their feet. Kevin was still calling me the best dad in the world every time that transfer cleared. My personal banker is a steady, reliable man named Tom, and I told him I needed to cancel a recurring transfer, $6,000 monthly, to Kevin Miller, effective immediately. Tom processed it. Done. Just like that. 23 seconds to undo 2 years of misplaced loyalty. I thanked him and hung up. The second call was to my attorney. His name is Don Haley. 40 years in estate law, office over on S.W. Morrison Street. Looks like a man who's seen every version of family disappointment this city has ever produced. I told him I needed to update my will, my life insurance beneficiaries, and any other documents in which my son's name appeared as a recipient of anything. Don said, how soon? I said, I'll have Sandra clear the calendar. The third call was to a private nursing agency, a reputable one out of Lake Oswego. I made the arrangements, and a woman named Lucy showed up a few days later. She was practical, efficient, and made genuinely excellent coffee. I moved through those first days at home like a man with a project. Let me walk you through the will changes because I want you to understand the full scope of what Dawn and I restructured. Kevin had been listed as the sole beneficiary of my estate, which included the Selwood house, my investment accounts, my retirement funds, and a life insurance policy that would have paid out just over $800,000. Every single line with his name on it was revised. Meanwhile, 3 days into what I could only assume was a very scenic Cabo vacation, Kevin's credit card declined. Now, I don't know exactly what happened in that moment. I wasn't there. But I have been told, by Kevin himself later, during one of the conversations he forced upon me, that it happened at the resort's main restaurant. Dinner. Brittany's friends from her college days were there, 4 of them along with their husbands and 1 serious boyfriend. And the check came, and Kevin put the card down with the casual confidence of a man who has never once in 2 years worried about a card declining. It declined. He tried another card. Declined. The reason both cards declined is that both were funded, at their core, by money that I had been supplying and money that Kevin had apparently not been carefully managing in my absence. When the transfer stopped, the cushion vanished. What remained was a gap wide enough to be immediately, publicly, humiliatingly obvious. Brittany, I'm told, handled it with the composed grace of someone who very much did not handle it with composed grace. Kevin excused himself from the table, presumably to call me. He'd blocked me after that hospital call, but desperate people unblock. This time my phone rang. I did not answer. Then he tried calling from Brittany's phone. Went to my regular voicemail. I'd already screened it. I did not call back. He sent a text from a number I didn't recognize. Dad, something's wrong with the account. Can you call me? I read it. Set the phone down. There was a baseball game on, and my ribs were healing ahead of schedule, according to my follow-up doctor at the clinic on Barber Boulevard. It was a good evening. The texts escalated over the next 24 hours, with a speed and creativity that would have been impressive under different circumstances. First confusion, then polite inquiry, then less polite inquiry than what I can only describe as a spiral. Kevin went from "Dad, is everything okay with the account?" to "I'm sure this is a bank error," to "Dad, please call me," to "I know you're upset, but this isn't fair," to my personal favorite. Brittany is really stressed right now, and you need to think about how your actions affect other people. I want to let that last one breathe for a second. My son, who had left me alone in a hospital bed with cracked ribs and a concussion to go to a beach resort, was now informing me from that same beach resort that I needed to consider how my actions were affecting other people's stress levels. I considered it thoroughly, and then I did absolutely nothing. Because here's what people who have never dealt with quiet strategic accountability don't understand. The most powerful thing you can do when someone expects you to react is to simply not. Every unanswered call is a message. Every ignored text is a statement. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to explain. The silence itself was doing all the work, and it was doing it far more effectively than any argument I could have had. Kevin needed to sit with what he'd done. Really sit with it. Not get talked out of it, not rationalize it away in a 2-minute phone call where I vented and he apologized halfway, and we both agreed to move on. I wanted him to have time. Enough time to truly understand the dimensions of what he'd chosen. He had plenty. Back in Portland, I was healing, reorganizing, and doing something I hadn't done in years. Thinking about myself, about what I actually wanted my life to look like. I started taking slow walks along the Springwater Corridor Trail once the ribs allowed it. Ironic, I know, given that's near where the accident happened. But I've never been one to avoid a place just because something bad happened nearby. The trail in late spring is beautiful. The roses were starting in the gardens along the way. I had coffee every morning at a small place on Tacoma Street 3 blocks from my house, run by a guy named Pete who'd been there 15 years and always had the game scores ready if you wanted them. My life, as it turned out, was pretty good. It had just been subsidizing someone else's at a cost I hadn't fully accounted for. Don Haley called me on a Thursday afternoon, about a week after the accident. All the documents were ready. I drove over to his office on Morrison Street, cast on my wrist, moving a little carefully because of the ribs, and I signed everything. New will, new beneficiary designations, new everything. Don slid the final folder across his desk and said, "You sure about all of this?" I said, "Don, I've never been more sure of anything since I poured the footings on the Hawthorne Overpass expansion in 2009. He nodded like that was a completely normal answer. I've always liked Don. Now, here's the part I need you to pay attention to. 79 missed calls. I know that sounds like a number from a movie, but when a man realizes his safety net just vanished, he doesn't stop dialing. Between Kevin's cell, Brittany's cell, a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be the hotel landline, and 3 calls from what appeared to be a Portland number I later traced to Brittany's mother. 79 attempts to reach me across a 36-hour window. Voicemails, texts, a direct message on Facebook from Brittany's account with the opening line, "James, I know you probably think you're making a point, but I did not finish reading it. I want to be precise here. I wasn't being cruel. I wasn't sitting at home cackling. I was recovering, handling my affairs, and letting natural consequences run at their own pace. If Kevin had come to that hospital when I needed him, or even called back that night with genuine concern, none of this would have happened. This isn't a story about a father who was looking for a reason to cut off his son. This is a story about a man who finally stopped ignoring what was directly in front of him. They cut the trip short. I found that out later, too. They came home 4 days early, 4 days out of what was supposed to be a 10-day trip, which means Kevin sat on that beach, surrounded by Brittany's friends and their presumably functioning credit cards, for another 3 days after the card incident before they finally booked the flights home. I choose to believe those were not comfortable days. They drove directly from PDX to my house in Selwood. Didn't call ahead, didn't text, just showed up. Kevin's silver Audi pulling up to the curb outside my house at 11:40 on a Tuesday morning. I know the time because I was sitting in the front room with coffee and the newspaper. Yes, the actual physical newspaper. I'm 63 and I've earned the right. When I saw the car pull up, I watched them get out. Kevin was in the clothes of a man who'd been traveling. Jeans, a t-shirt slightly wrinkled. He looked tired. Brittany was in a sundress and large sunglasses, the kind of outfit that made complete sense 12 hours ago in a Mexican resort town, and made somewhat less sense on a mild Portland street. She looked like she was marshalling something. A speech, maybe. A strategy. They came up the front walk. I set down my coffee. I need you to understand something about this moment. For 9 days I had been quiet. I had not raised my voice. I had not sent a single angry message. I had not called Kevin to explain what I'd done or why I'd done it. I had simply gone about the business of reorganizing my life and let the consequences arrive on their own schedule. And here they were, on my front porch, ringing my doorbell. I stood up, walked to the front door, and opened it. Kevin looked at me, at the cast on my wrist, at the fading bruise along my temple, at the man his father actually was, standing in his own doorway, and something moved across his face. Something complicated. I'd like to say it was full, genuine remorse, but honestly I'm not qualified to diagnose what I saw. It was a lot of things at once. Brittany had already started talking before I even fully had the door open. James, I know there are some things that need to be addressed, and we want to. I looked at Kevin. Didn't you block this number? And then I closed the door. Not slammed, not dramatically, just closed. The soft, definitive click of a man who has nothing further to add at this time. I heard them on the porch for a moment, some murmuring. Then Kevin knocked. I went back to my chair. He knocked again, called my name through the door. Said, "Dad, come on, please." His voice had lost whatever vacation was left in it. He sounded like a kid. He sounded 20 years old in the worst possible way. I turned the newspaper page. There's a thing that happens when you stop being available to someone who has always counted on your availability. They escalate, and then the escalation runs out of steam, and then you get to the real thing underneath. The fear. Kevin stood on that porch for 20 minutes. I heard it all. Brittany's voice going from managed to frustrated. Kevin's going from pleading to quiet. At one point I heard what might have been genuine crying. Not the strategic kind. Not the kind designed to move a room, but the tired, cornered kind that comes when a person runs out of other options. I sat with that. I'm his father. I'm not a stone. But I also remembered Debbie the nurse, standing in that hallway, having just been hung up on. I remembered 11 stitches and a hospital ceiling at 9 o'clock at night. I remembered vacation comes first. Eventually I heard them leave. The car doors, the engine, the silence that followed. I didn't open the door again that day. What I did do, 3 days later after Kevin had sent a letter through actual mail, handwritten, 4 pages, which told me a number of things about the sincerity of the effort, was call Don Haley and have him draft a formal letter outlining what had changed and what, if anything, might be discussed in the future. Not a reconciliation, not a doorway back to the way things were. A set of conditions, a structure, the way you'd approach any load-bearing assessment, clear terms, documented, with defined parameters for what happens if those terms are or aren't met. Don said it was the most organized emotional response he'd seen in 40 years of estate law. I told him that was the nicest thing anyone had said to me since the accident. Kevin's letter, the handwritten one, I read twice. He knew the allowance was gone and wasn't coming back, at least not in any form tied to a baseline expectation that it would always be there. He knew that whatever inheritance he'd been quietly planning his future around had been redirected. And to his credit, and I say this with complete sincerity, his letter didn't spend much time on any of that. It spent most of its 4 pages on the hospital, on the phone call, on the moment he hung up and the fact that he'd known, even as he was doing it, that it was wrong. That part mattered. I'm not telling you we sat down over coffee a week later and everything was resolved. I'm not telling you Brittany and I had a heart-to-heart, and she apologized and I forgave everyone over a nice dinner in the Pearl District. This is real life. Real life doesn't resolve in one scene. What I'm telling you is that Kevin came back, alone without Brittany, without a strategy, and sat in my kitchen on a Thursday evening and talked to me for 3 hours. Really talked. Not managed the situation. Not handled his father. Talked. He was honest about things I didn't know. About the financial pressure he'd been feeling. About the way he and Brittany had been using the monthly allowance as a crutch. I'm 63 years old and honest enough to know that when you solve every problem for someone, you don't actually make them stronger. You make yourself feel needed. And there's a difference. I had been as responsible for some of this dynamic as Kevin had. Not for him blocking my number. Not for the vacation. That's on him. Fully. And he knew it. But for the underlying pattern, I had a hand in that. I could admit it. We didn't hug. We're not really huggers, the Miller men. But when he left that night, I walked him to the door, and he turned around on the front step and looked at me. At the cast, at the bruise that was almost gone by then. And he said, "I'm sorry, Dad, for the real thing. I'm sorry I didn't come." I said I know, and I let him sit with the fact that I know it's not the same as it's fine. Months later, Frank and I did the Highway 101 trip. We drove up through Cannon Beach, stopped at the Haystack Rock overlook, grabbed chowder at a little place in Seaside that Frank swore by and was not wrong about, and kept going up to Astoria. Spent 2 nights there. Walked partway across the Astoria-Megler Bridge one morning, far enough to feel the wind and see the river open up. And Frank said that was the smartest dumb decision I'd made all year. Stood on the banks of the Columbia River where it opens out toward the Pacific, and watched cargo ships moving slow and quiet through the gray water. Frank is a good travel companion. Doesn't need to fill silence. Doesn't need to have a plan for every hour. We drove back down through Tillamook and made it home to Selwood by Sunday evening. And somewhere on that drive, somewhere between the coast and the city, with the window cracked and the radio low, I realized I hadn't thought about Kevin or Brittany or any of it for nearly 2 full days. That was the moment I knew I was going to be fine. Really fine. Not performing fine, actually fine. It was the best weekend I'd had in years. I came home to a house that was mine, a life that was mine, a set of financial accounts that reflected my actual decisions, and a set of relationships with my son, with my future, with the version of myself I wanted to be for whatever years I had left, that were now built on something honest. The $6,000 is still stopped. You can't build an adult life on someone else's money and call it self-sufficiency. And here's the thing I keep coming back to. The part I think about on those morning walks along the Springwater corridor, with the roses coming in and the trail quiet at 7 a.m. My son needed to find out that his father was not a utility, not a direct deposit, not a safety net with a personality attached. He needed to find out that I was a specific man with a specific life, specific feelings, and a specific set of limits, and that when you blow past those limits without looking back, consequences don't call ahead. They just show up. I'm James Miller. I live in Selwood. Life is good. Life is really quiet. And I'm keeping it that way. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from. I will see you on the next one.